It is deeply unsettling when the foundations of the world's most stable alliances begin to fracture, not from external aggression, but from internal friction and miscalculation. We often assume the relationship between the United States and Canada is a permanent fixture of the geopolitical landscape, as unyielding as the geography they share. However, recent developments suggesting a confrontation between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney indicate that the bedrock of North American cooperation is shifting. This is not a dispute over steel tariffs or dairy quotas. It is a battle for the fuel of the future. At the heart of this tension lies uranium, a resource critical to national security, the expansion of artificial intelligence, and the long-term health of the global energy grid. The official narrative centers on the Trump administration's ambitious plan to deploy hundreds of small modular reactors to power the next generation of American industry. Yet behind the scenes, this grand vision has collided with a reality that Washington seemingly failed to prepare for: America's near-total reliance on foreign nuclear fuel. When reports surfaced of a direct, high-stakes request from the White House to Ottawa for guaranteed uranium access, the response was a single, definitive word that sent shockwaves through NATO headquarters in Brussels. To understand how we reached this point, we must look at the institutional incentives and the historical norms that have governed this partnership for decades, and why they are suddenly failing. Historically, the United States has allowed its domestic uranium production to wither, relying on the assumption that allied markets would always remain open and compliant. Today, the U.S. produces virtually no uranium of its own, while Canada sits atop some of the richest and highest-grade deposits on Earth. Particularly in the Athabasca Basin, this creates a massive power imbalance. As the Trump administration pushes for a $400 billion nuclear expansion to support AI data centers, facilities that require the kind of 24/7 baseload power only nuclear energy can provide, Canada has realized it holds the ultimate leverage. The system of international diplomacy usually relies on quiet negotiations and mutual benefit, but the current climate has shifted toward a more transactional and aggressive style of engagement. By treating Canada as a subordinate rather than a sovereign partner, the administration inadvertently triggered a defensive reaction from the Carney government. When the request for preferential uranium pricing and fast-tracked approvals was met with a flat no, it wasn't just a rejection of a business deal. It was a reassertion of Canadian sovereignty. In the face of perceived bullying and tariff threats, this standoff has immediate and severe consequences for the Democratic Alliance. In Brussels, NATO officials are conducting emergency briefings, concerned that if the two most integrated partners in the world cannot agree on energy security, the collective defense of the West is at risk. Meanwhile, the role of key actors like France and the United Kingdom has shifted. They are stepping into the void, negotiating their own long-term deals with Canada and effectively bypassing American buyers. This leaves the U.S. isolated, stuck between a desperate need for fuel and a partner that is no longer willing to provide it without significant concessions. The human impact of this systemic failure will eventually be felt by every American and Canadian citizen. If the U.S. cannot secure the uranium it needs, the transition to clean, reliable energy will stall, leading to higher electricity costs for households and a loss of competitive edge for the manufacturing sector. Furthermore, the lack of coordination erodes civic trust in the ability of leaders to manage the most basic requirements of a modern economy. We are witnessing a moment where the incentives of short-term political posturing are actively undermining the long-term stability of the institutions designed to protect us. Ultimately, this situation forces us to reflect on the nature of interdependence. For too long, the system has operated on the assumption that allies have no choice but to follow the leader. Mark Carney's one-word answer has proven that in a world of scarce strategic resources, even the most powerful nations are vulnerable if they do not treat their partners with respect and foresight. As the spot price of uranium climbs and tensions at the border rise, we must ask ourselves, what happens to the health of a democracy when its leaders prioritize ultimatums over genuine partnership? Would you like me to proceed with part 2 of this script, focusing on the wider economic fallout and the strategic questions facing the alliance? This disruption in the uranium supply chain is not merely a logistical hurdle. It is a profound indicator of a system in crisis. When the mechanisms of North American trade and defense, which have operated on autopilot for generations, suddenly require high-level emergency intervention, it reveals how thin the veneer of cooperation has become. The institutional procedures that once allowed for a seamless flow of strategic minerals were built on the norm of mutual deference. Today, that norm has been replaced by a logic of extraction and leverage. We are seeing a shift where the internal incentives of domestic politics, the need for a leader to look strong at home, are directly colliding with the external requirements of a stable alliance. If we look at the role of the major technology firms, the situation becomes even more precarious. Companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon are no longer just software providers. They have become quasi-state actors with energy needs that rival medium-sized nations. Their massive investments in artificial intelligence were predicated on a stable energy future, a future where the U.S. government could guarantee the resources needed for expansion. By failing to secure the uranium supply chain before announcing a massive nuclear rollout, the administration has created a credibility gap that the private sector is now forced to fill. This undermines civic trust, as the public begins to wonder if the grand promises of technological dominance and energy independence are built on a foundation of sand. The human impact of this standoff is tangible and reaches far beyond the boardroom. For a small manufacturer in the American Midwest or a family in a rural Canadian province, the geopolitical chess game between Trump and Carney translates into real-world costs. Higher heating bills, fluctuating fuel prices, and the threat of layoffs due to stalled industrial projects are the collateral damage of a broken diplomatic process. When international relations are treated as a zero-sum game, it is the ordinary citizen who pays the price for the lack of coordination. The sense of security that comes from knowing your nation's most important partnership is stable is being replaced by a pervasive anxiety about what the next phone call or the next tweet might bring. This brings us to a critical moment of system-level reflection. We must ask ourselves, has the pursuit of immediate national advantage blinded us to the necessity of collective resilience? The current standoff suggests that the institutions we rely on to manage our shared interests are becoming increasingly brittle. When a strategic asset like uranium is used as a weapon in a trade war, it signals a move away from a rules-based order toward a world of might makes right. This transition doesn't just threaten the uranium market. It threatens the very idea of an integrated North America. Can we truly claim to have a unified defense strategy if we cannot even agree on how to power the vessels and facilities that provide that defense? The questions we face now are fundamental to the health of our democracy and the longevity of our institutions. Are we prepared to live in a world where every alliance is a series of temporary transactions? What happens to the special relationship between the US and Canada when the longest undefended border in the world becomes a site of economic fortification? And perhaps most importantly, how do we rebuild the trust necessary to solve the massive challenges of the 21st century, from climate change to the regulation of AI? If we cannot cooperate on the most basic elements of our shared infrastructure, the path forward requires a return to a more sophisticated form of diplomacy, one that recognizes that a partner's strength is an asset, not a threat. It requires moving beyond the language of ultimatums and rediscovering the art of the long-term compromise. As we watch this nuclear standoff unfold, we are witnessing a live test of whether the Western alliance can still function in an era of intense nationalism. The result of this test will define the geopolitical map for decades to come, determining whether we enter a new age of prosperity and clean energy or descend into a cycle of mutual sabotage and technological stagnation. If you find these deep dives into the systems and institutions that shape our world valuable, I invite you to subscribe and join our community here at Jhone Will Insight. Your engagement helps us continue to provide the historical context and analytical perspective that are so often missing from the daily headlines. By asking the difficult questions together, we can better understand the forces at play and work toward a more stable and cooperative future. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below. Stay informed, stay analytical, and I will see you in the next analysis.